Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Experience Lounge podcast. I hope you are all doing well. Happy Monday. At least for me, it's the end of my Monday. Laura, how are you doing?
I'm good. Do you know, because obviously I'm on maternity leave, every day feels the same for me at the
Yeah,
moment. So the fact that it's Monday, yeah, is kind of irrelevant in the sense of the
every
only
day's a
the
win.
only difference today. Exactly. The only difference is I haven't had a baby class today. I know I said to you I might go to baby yoga, but I decided not to. So
Oh,
but sun is shining here, which I do think I know I keep talking about the weather every time, but
mm,
it's lovely.
yeah.
So I'm gonna go for a walk later and enjoy the sunshine. How about you? What have you been up to?
I have been, as I mentioned in the last podcast, I went away to Bali for a hen
Oh
do. And
yes.
actually, we were supposed to record this yesterday, but I was in more than a fragile state traveling back from Bali. So Laura kindly agreed to move this call. And it was so much fun. I had a really, really great time. I went with another friend of mine who also has a baby. So we took the babies with us and the husbands. And it was just really nice, but also a really new experience for me because I've never been the mum at a party, if that makes sense. And
Mm.
everyone who doesn't have kids always asks, how are things going with the baby? But after one or two drinks, you kind of know, like, you're just being nice. You really just don't care about how my baby is, but we're trying to have some kind of conversation. But no, it was really, really nice. Thank you. And yeah, busy Monday back for me. I've had lots of calls. And yeah, today's episode is our first Q&A episode, which is so exciting. So we've got
It
three
is.
questions that
Yeah.
our lovely listeners, you people, have sent in. So we will definitely get round to calling those out and addressing those questions as well, and hopefully providing some useful advice. And before we get into that, one thing I did want to shout about was I had an amazing call today with the team at Pin. We've been calling it Pine on this podcast, but it is Pin, Pyn, Pin. And if you don't know them, they do a lot around kind of in the moment employee experience. So, for example,
Mm.
if you promote a manager, and that transaction takes place in Workday, there will be over like a series of a time that you specify manager content that goes to that person. So if they're a new first line manager, they'll receive like kind of automated training content and guidance and advice in the moment. So I think it's super, super powerful stuff. I love the solution. Of all the HR tech brands out there, I think it has the most um I guess modern aesthetic. The website's super cool. So if you love kind of modern content, definitely go and check that out. But the reason why I'm bringing it up is they are about to release very soon an employee journey mapping tool, totally free of charge for organizations and for individuals, which means
That's
you'll be
cool.
able to go in and map your experiences, so your employee experiences. And they're a really cool function. Sorry, let me start that again. There's really cool functionality in there around being able to kind of chart the key moments that matter, communication touch
Mm.
points, being able to highlight different teams that provide different parts of that end-to-end experience, like onboarding. And you're able to collaborate in the tool as well and have versioning, so you can see kind of this is the change to the process. Anyway, I'm calling it out because you can go ahead, and I'll leave the link in the show notes, and sign up for the waitlist to be told when that is released. But I think for us, especially in the EX design space, a tool like this is amazing because there's nothing out there that is you kind of fit for purpose employee experience design. I feel like it's either Visio or Lucid or something in between. And so, yeah, shout out to Pin and those guys for creating such an awesome tool that is free, which is amazing. At least I think it's amazing. So,
No, it
but yeah,
is.
yeah,
Free tools. Very good.
free tools, very good. So yeah, quick shout out there, little HR tech spotlight. So definitely go and check that out in the show notes. Laura, anything else you want to catch up on? Any other news? Any other HR bits before we get into the questions?
I don't think so. I think let's get stuck into them.
Let's get
I was
stuck
I, I
in.
was wondering how many we had, but we did have a good few in, didn't we?
We
So
did.
we're gonna make it a regular slot, which is good.
Yeah, for sure. So we've got three questions today. And the first one is focused more around KPIs. The second one is around the implementation of Qualtrics. And the third one is transitioning into the EX space from more traditional HR roles. So we'll kick off with the first question, which is, what is, from your experience, the most relevant and compelling argument or KPI when it comes to the ROI of EX/PX, employee experience or people experience. And this is from the amazing Sebastian, who listens to our podcast. So hello, Sebastian. So Laura, do you want to start us off on this one?
Yeah, so I think we sort of talked before we were recording that it depends on which part of the experience that you would be measuring. So if it was digital experience, or even if it was with a focus on services that are delivered from your service or specialist delivery function, you might look at different measurements like CSAT or voice of customer content that comes through. And even actually what's super interesting, I think, is sentiment analysis around some of that kind of measurement. And there are platforms that will kind of do that and use AI to sort of look at some of that sentiment too. Or there's obviously, I think in some organizations, people would go down the manual route where you might have teams that would actually kind of go in and look at some of that. So that would be an example in terms of some of the measurement there. I think some of the kind of sort of research that I've seen, and I was going to shout out the Fount TI People State of EX report. And so it was a survey that was run in 2022, but there were some really interesting findings in there that did sort of talk about organizations. The sort of number one challenge that organizations face is around that measurement. So I think in terms of the question, if you're actually thinking this through and thinking actually we're finding it difficult and we're finding it challenging, that's not unusual according to the Fount and TI People research. And they have like a whole wide group of organizations that they ask these EX questions to across EX practitioners and HR practitioners too. So not unusual. I think what was interesting though in some of the research that I've seen come out from Fount and TI People around measurement was that it was around kind of 50% of the kind of, I describe them as sort of everyday moments that matter. So the example when they told this to me was logging onto your work laptop and the amount of time that potentially could take. Those kind of elements at work that create friction, so they mean that the experience isn't frictionless, actually aggregated together have an impact. I think it was about 50% more than if you targeted things like measuring onboarding or parental leave, so those kind of things. And I think that's a really interesting stat, because when you go and talk about employee experience, I think a lot of the time when you're perhaps presenting to stakeholders, they will say, yes, it's onboarding or it's offboarding or it's parental leave. And they are definitely really super
Big
important.
moments,
yeah, like we've done episodes on them, right? But there's definitely a need to focus on, I would describe them as kind of the everyday friction that people experience, because when they're aggregated together from a measurement perspective, they have a more negative impact on employee experience than if you had a poor parental leave experience, as an example. So they're just a few, I guess, thoughts, like thinking about how you would measure. I think it depends what you're trying to measure, but I know you had a view on that before we sort of started recording. So, what are your thoughts, Sasha?
Yeah, I agree with you. And I actually think a lot of people are really surprised to hear the report that you just referenced around kind of, it's those everyday moments that are actually playing a really pivotal role in the employee experience. So I definitely agree with you there. And I actually think that's a really powerful stat to bring in, as you say, to those kind of senior stakeholders or any skeptics around kind of the investment in EX as well. I think for me, there are a couple of things. So I think when we talk about employee experience, often when I engage with clients on different projects, I've mentioned this before, but depending on the maturity of the organization, when we talk about EX, sometimes we're really meaning service experience, and other times we mean the broader employee experience. So I think talking about both, to give specifics, I think if your EX is still focused on your service experience, I think CSAT is always going to be kind of the key there. So if it's internal service experience, CSAT will always be that primary kind of KPI that we're really trying to work towards improving. And I also think Second to that, and kind of in a similar vein to what you mentioned, Laura, is one I find really powerful is kind of that time to resolve. So seeing that decrease, because generally when we see that time becoming shorter, employees are generally happier because they're spending less time waiting for their tickets to be resolved as well. So I think whilst it's not exactly a direct measure of the experience, I think it's really powerful, especially if you're talking to service experience stakeholders as well. And I think that kind of touches both cost and experience as well. So I think that for the service experience piece. For the overall piece, whilst I think we're definitely maturing in the metrics that we're able to gather around overall experience, I still think looking at your engagement survey and whatever data you can get from that is still really important. So kind of calling out a couple of metrics here. So eNPS is definitely one. So employee net promoter score. So how likely are people to recommend your company as a place to work? And then I think loosely, and we often talk about this, is the retention piece. But I think retention's really hard just because there are so many other factors that go into employees leaving and kind of career paths and industry. So I think retention is one that, whilst a lot of people say if we invest in EX, less people are going to leave, I think we have to be careful about using that one, particularly when we're, in terms of this question, arguing the case for the ROI on EX. So I still think, to kind of summarize, CSAT if your service experience is the focus, and then still that eNPS for kind of overall experience. I'd also say as well, and I've spoken about this on the podcast before, and when I talk to clients about measuring EX, your managers are still the most important stakeholders when it comes to employee experience. And so they are your day-to-day kind of custodians of the experience. And just because you have one overarching experience mantra, your managers could very well be creating a very fundamentally different experience for their teams. And so I think in that case as well, if you're looking for some key metrics that you want to pull out for employee experience, I also think kind of manager satisfaction rates, or however you measure it, depending on your engagement survey style, is still really important. So I think if we can see that improving, that is also a really good indicator of experience. So I think that's it for the KPI piece. I think generally speaking, the compelling argument as well. And I worked with one client on something around kind of the case for people experience before. And actually, we got so caught up in, here's this study that talks about the link between EX and CX, and here's this study that talks about retention, or here's what some other company has done. I think sometimes we overcomplicate it and we think we have to come to the table with all of these weighty statistics around the investment in EX. But actually, a lot of the stakeholders you talk to will be in agreement with you when you say it is common sense and logic that if our people are happy, our customers are going to be happy, and we're going to reap the rewards of having happy, satisfied employees. And whilst that doesn't necessarily cover all stakeholders, I would just kind of throw that in there as not really a message of hope, but I guess more of a pragmatic response, being try and not get too caught up in building this very extensive case for the investment in employee experience. I think you'll find people are a lot more receptive to that investment in 2023 than they were even last year and the year before. What do you think?
Agree. Yeah, agree, definitely. And I think it's also I think in this scenario, less is more as well. So having a few really concrete measures that you review consistently over time, rather than, a whole raft of, 25, 30, because it's too many. And I think when you are then having the conversations with business leaders, managers, you want something succinct that you can read, which sort of then talks about the value of the experience. So that would be my takeaway too, is keep it simple as well.
Yeah. So hopefully that answers that question. We'll move on to question 2 as well. Otherwise, I think we could be here all day. But question 2 is more around Qualtrics. So the question here is, we're in the process of implementing Qualtrics at our organization. My role covers analytics, so I'm keen to understand what tips you'd have for us as we embark on the implementation and launch. In particular, any tips on ensuring it's not just seen as the annual survey tool. Thanks so much. Love the podcast. Laura, do you want to go first on this one? I think Qualtrics is used and loved by many. So any tips on the implementation?
So the implementation, without knowing all of the different modules that your organization has purchased, I think one of the things I would say is think about how you democratize the data. And by that, I mean, putting data in the hands of particularly people leaders, managers, business leaders, because I think there's sometimes a tendency within a HR function, or I think this person said they were in people analytics, right? Like to almost keep the data within the HR function. And actually the power of it is that, and there's the ability to do this within Qualtrics, is that people leaders in particular can self-serve the data of their teams. And depending on what you do, so annual survey is definitely one use case, but that would be my sort of other counsel would be think about how you want to use, it doesn't have to be Qualtrics, it could be any sort of surveying tool platform, but think about the use cases that you also want to implement. So an annual engagement survey is a really obvious one, but also think about things like pulse surveys.
Yeah.
We've talked a little in the previous question, but again, if you're thinking about that survey implementation tool, how you would use it for certain experiences. So do you want to use Qualtrics for onboarding or offboarding or parental leave? And I think there's also, when you think of the implementation, richness in talking to your functional partners in areas perhaps like property or IT, and the link to customer experience, because knowing the Qualtrics platform, you are able to use that surveying tool for CX, so for customer surveys, and also you can use it across functions. So the power of all of that EX data, if you were using it for customer experience data and surveys, and then not just for what is typically deemed like HR experiences, if it was, you know, when somebody joins and gets their laptop, how's that experience? If you use it for, I think, for all of your kind of surveying, then the richness of data that you would actually have that you could use is sort of really rich. And that comes back to that point I made around the democratization of data, because for me the key roles are, as I say, people leaders, but also getting it in the hands of your HR business partners, because they are typically, and this is kind of the experience I've had in my most recent role, closest to the business in terms of that relationship with business stakeholders, and they know the business, so they are able to help translate, you know, what does that data mean. And I think we've also talked in the past, because to me it's any kind of technology implementation, right, is start small with some of those use cases. So what I've described there is like a kind of rich model of what you could do, but actually, you know, start small, and it could be starting with the annual engagement survey, but applying some of those principles around that democratization of data, and then build, and then say, okay, so we then would go for an onboarding survey, or we'll do some pulse surveys, our performance management experience, whatever it might be. And then the final thing is which in some ways I'm like, why did I not say this first? But is get employees involved in the design of those surveys, because even if it was just being used for an annual employee engagement survey, if that's an employee engagement survey that has, you know, 60 questions or something, you're going to turn so many people off filling that in. So having employees, as we would sort of say in that human-centered design, helping you to design those surveys is absolutely critically important. And making sure, which I think when we do any kind of tech implementation, but, you know, this example of the surveys, is going back out regularly to employees and asking them what they've thought of that experience of filling in the survey, and why, and when you see the response rate, trying to understand why that is how it is. So they would be my thoughts. What about you? What do you think?
Yes, I agree with everything that you've said. I think I've got a few bullet points here, and I've really gotten really practical. So apologies if you ask this question. This is a bit too detailed. But I think first of all, I'd say, and this is the same with any implementation, is being really clear on the objectives of your investment in Qualtrics. And I think having that set out at the beginning of your implementation is really key, because then what you don't end up getting into during the implementation journey is this real this sense of demand. So you end up being like, you're taking requests from everybody, and their demands are always going to be the most important. And so having those objectives set out, if you haven't already got them as part of your implementation plan, is really key. And I think as part of those, that kind of objective document that you're going to communicate is also a roadmap. So you might not have a beautiful roadmap of like a IT standard potentially, but just having something so that you're managing expectations. So for example, you're saying, look, phase one, this quarter or this half of the year, we're going to be focusing on the annual engagement survey. And that might well be for everyone in the organization, or as you say, it could be like a pilot opportunity. And then we're going to look at evolving it. So phase two is this, and phase three. And I think being really upfront with your key stakeholders, the people that you really want bought into the use of Qualtrics or the application of its data, really, really, really important. So really get that out there as soon as possible. Kind of like a pitch deck. That's how I always talk about it when I talk with my clients. It's like, we need a pitch deck for this. We need to make sure that it's punchy, it's not too long, it's very clear for us to communicate. And like, if you're kicking off a workshop, a design workshop with people, and you want to get perspectives, it's something that you open with. So it's super, super clear, and it helps manage expectations. I think another thing I have got here is thinking about your customers. So you've mentioned this before about HR business partners and really getting that data, kind of democratizing that data. I think as well, it's being really clear that what you are trying to produce isn't a list of data points. It's you're trying to empower people to, and I saw this actually, it was a McKinsey post, and it really resonated with me. It's like moving from summarizing to synthesizing. And so, I think a lot of us have a habit of saying, here's a summary of the data within this part of the business. But actually what we want to do is really help our customers, our people, is really make sure that they are empowered with like the high level ability to take the data and say, okay, here's what we're seeing, if that makes sense. So really making
it's the say what, right? I think. The say what, in the sense of
the say what,
you can present a summary, but it's like, say what? Like, what does that actually tell you
absolutely
about the business? And that's the bit where I think, particularly in my sort of more recent experience, your HR business partners are the people that would be able to bridge that conversation to help say, actually, we've got this data, but like you say, how do you kind of synthesize that into some insights, and what does it then mean we then do differently here on in that part of the business?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think, and that's quite a good kind of test as well, when you're looking at the data and thinking, oh, that sounds really great, because you're in HR analytics. Just because it's a cool data point and it's something that you haven't had before, it doesn't necessarily mean that we need it in phase one, phase two, phase three. So that is the other thing I would say. So moving on to the third and final question then, what advice would you give for someone looking to move from, I guess, a traditional HR role into an EX role internally? I'm in comp at the moment, but looking to make the move. So Laura, what do you think?
So firstly, we've talked about this heaps over the last couple of years on the podcast, but I couldn't not mention it, was make sure that you do your human-centered design training, because I'm not even exaggerating when I say I use that every day at work, because I see it as a problem-solving tool. I even use the kind of clustering to even do things like to-do lists. It's a tool that I use, like I say, every day. So for me, that would be a big one. And we've said in the past that I think Luma is probably our preferred one. And obviously, if your organization offers that as something that you can take, then a conversation with your manager to do that. But if not, I would say I personally think it's worth the investment, even if your organization wouldn't fund it. So that would definitely be one. I think then, having done that training, thinking about how could you incorporate those techniques in your current role. And the comp one, I was kind of reflecting on this as I was thinking about kind of how to respond to the question, was actually there's quite a lot of experiences, and not knowing which part of Comp and Ben they're in, but there's quite a lot of experiences within Comp and Ben that are really emotive to people. It's about, you know, being paid. It could be about your annual bonus cycle, the allocation of bonus, all of those things. And they are really emotive experiences. So I would say be thinking about how you could use some of those techniques to improve parts of that experience. So it could be anything from how you, if you do have bonuses, like how you run that annual bonus cycle, how you even distribute the letters that go out to people. All of those kind of things are brilliant use cases for bringing that EX methodology into your thinking. And then the other, which I did a lot, less so now as I've kind of got more senior, but when I was more junior, I did a lot of work shadowing of people. So I would, you know, go and sit at the time, like I say, many years ago, but go and kind of sit with business partners in HR or other parts of the function, and just kind of understand what a typical day would look like. And I would say, particularly with the virtual tools with EX now, you could easily do that with somebody that's in EX as a sort of EX practitioner. Then the final one is a bit linked, I suppose, to being able to do it in your, you know, kind of comp cycle or in your sort of Comp and Ben role, but is if there's any projects within your organization where the team who do EX are perhaps looking for support, you know, be the first to kind of put your hand up and sort of do that. So for me, it would be, how can you kind of build some of those skills in your current role? And then I think as and when then the EX roles come up, you'd be able to, in the interview process, kind of talk about how you've used EX techniques and how you've kind of delivered that change, even in your current role. So they're my thoughts. What about you, Sasha?
Yeah, so you stole all of my points. Thanks.
Oh, and we didn't even confer.
No, we didn't. But yeah, definitely go and check out Luma. We loved it, right? And as you say, I use it all the time. Yeah. I even use it
all the time,
managing my personal life as well. Like always, love doing that. So yeah, definitely that. As you say, get involved in those projects. And I think as well, a lot of the facilitation of EX design workshops or even just redesigning activities is feeling confident with the tools that you're using. And so one of the other things that I would suggest is, you know, I use Mural a lot. I know you use Miro, and there are plenty of other tools like it. But I think is just using it day to day and getting more confident with it. And, you know, for example, if you've got everyone jumping on a call and you're talking about, I don't even know, the end of year pay cycle or the bonus cycle or whatever it is, and just saying, hi guys, like, can we do a couple of minutes just in Mural, or like tracking notes in Mural? You know, I've used Mural to manage projects before because it's really allowed my stakeholders on the client side to build more confidence using Mural. And that's meant that when they then go on to do workshops or those kind of activities, they're feeling a lot more confident as well. So I definitely think that as well. So start using the tools that we're referencing during the podcast, and start to get a bit more confident. And then I think the only thing I'd add on the spot is maybe looking at a mentor. So reach out to someone that's in the space, ideally someone that's a little bit tenured, or maybe even someone that's just come from the HR analytics space and is working on EX projects, or, you know, someone from like TI people, for example. Those guys are amazing, and I think they're a lovely bunch. They would definitely be open to mentoring. I'm sure I'm speaking on their behalf there, but you know, definitely go and check those people out, because I think it's really, really important that you're connecting with people, and of course following them on LinkedIn, because LinkedIn for me is a fantastic, whilst it gives me a lot of pain, it's a fantastic source of EX thinking and content and listening to interesting, very smart people talking about what they're doing. So yeah, that would be it. And go for it. You'll love it. You'll never regret it. It's a growing industry. I think it's where all the money is as well. So
right. One more thing actually I just thought of as you were talking was and it's a bit linked, I suppose, to LinkedIn, but there's so many free webinars or virtual conferences or face-to-face conferences now that we're out of COVID, that you could go and attend. And I just think that's also where you can be a bit of a sponge of just soaking up all the information. And this to me shows where EX has kind of evolved, is that I've been to conferences, like last year when I went to Unleash, there was a whole track which is EX. So, you can go and kind of sit in some of those and listen to use cases from different organizations, but also, like you say, some really influential thinkers in the space. And then I just remember too, you did a reel session on our Instagram of like top books. So that's the other one. So go and check that out as well. If you go onto our Instagram, which is the Experience Lounge podcast, and there's a reel there where you could look at some of the books that we found really useful as well.
Perfect. So that is it. That is the end of our first Q&A episode. I hope those answers have been helpful. Thank you again so much for sending in your questions. Keep on sending them in. We've got a few more questions next week. Actually, one of them is quite interesting about how to manage stakeholder conflict on EX projects. So I'm quite excited to see how we respond to that one. But yeah, as always, like, subscribe, reach out to us on LinkedIn if you've got any specific subjects or topics you want us to talk about. And we will be back next week with a regular episode, not a Q&A. And so we will see you all then. Take care.
Bye.
Bye.